Okay, so today's topic in our unit, environmental chemistry, is topic 5, getting away from it all. So this topic we'll be looking at things like environmental monitoring, as well as like biological indicators. So, so firstly, we all produce waste. It doesn't matter what type of organism it is. Um, so regardless of the type of organism, materials and energy are taken in from the environment and waste products are deposited. All organisms do that. It's one of the characteristics of life that we've talked about um, before. So usually wastes that are produced or used by usually wastes are getting used by other organisms in an ecosystem so that overall the environment is balanced. But when we have more waste being produced than being removed, then we are seeing a problem. All right, so this is the case only if the rate at which wastes are removed is equal to or greater than the rate at which those wastes are produced. Now humans are producing a lot of waste, and especially because we have seen such an increase in population size of humans. So waste is a big problem. So environmental monitoring um, is done to protect and to monitor the environment. So some of the waste that's entering the environment, it is more harmful than others. So waste that is non-persistent, these are wastes that can be broken down into simple, non-polluting compounds, and it's done by naturally occurring chemical reactions or bacterial action. So, for example, fertilizers and sewage. But there's waste that is persistent. These are pollutants that are accumulating in the environment. They're breaking down very slowly, or perhaps they don't break down at all. So these include things like pesticides, petroleum products, heavy metal wastes, and the damage can be irreversible because these pollutants are persistent and they don't break down as easily as the non-persistent type. So both persistent and non-persistent wastes are a concern if they're becoming concentrated enough to harm organisms. Um, and the other thing about pollutants is that eventually they will find their way into the water and into the water source. Um, it gets washed out of the atmosphere in precipitation, so like rainfall, snow, as acid precipitation. There might also be direct seepage. So correct chemical tests are done for pollutants, and these are done to determine the presence or absence of that pollutant within a water sample. So for example, like we've looked at like pH strips and other tests can be done to test for pollutants and toxins. There's something called an algal bloom. This is when excessive amounts of nitrates in water are showing a sign of decomposition of organic matter. Um, so, so algae, these are tiny plants, they form this dense growth. It's called an algal bloom. And it's the result of excess phosphates and nitrates entering water sources from sewage and usually agricultural runoff. So what happens is you have all this excess growth of algae, and then when the algae dies, it decomposes, and that leads to low oxygen levels. So there's low oxygen levels now, and this is going to lead to death of aquatic organisms. There's usually a strong smell of decay that this process is occurring. So watch a couple videos here just showing these algal blooms. All right, so next we're looking at biological indicators of water quality. So most types of pollution, they lower the ability of an environment to support life. And like we saw in those videos in aquatic systems, pollution, it decreases the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. So in effect, pollutants decrease the number and variety of organisms in that area. So when there's a decrease in biological diversity in aquatic systems, that's an indicator of the quality of the water. So when we're talking about a biological indicator, biological, talking about living things. So a biological indicator is a living organism whose state is indicative of conditions in a particular environment. So biological indicators of water quality. So if we look at this diagram here, we'll see here, this is the clean zone. Then here we have a decomposition zone, and we can see like oxygen levels are declining, showing that pink line. Here we have a septic zone, then a recovery zone, and then we have the clean zone again. So we can see like oxygen levels here, 8 ppm. When it's really low, we're at 2 ppm. So when we're at the clean zone, we can see like lots of diversity. We see trout, perch, bass. We see other organisms like mayfly, stonefly, the caddisfly larvae. And then when we get into the decomposition zone, we only see organisms like carp, catfish, and leeches. At the septic zone, there's no fish at all. We see things like sludge worms, midge, and mosquito larvae. When we get to the recovery zone, we start seeing carp, catfish, leeches, isopods, and then we get back to the clean zone, and now we'll start to see the trout, perch, bass, mayfly, stonefly, caddisfly larvae. So what we see here is that some species of fish like trout and perch, we only can find them in clean, well-oxygenated bodies of water. Carp and catfish, as we see here and here, they can, however, tolerate higher levels of pollution. So it takes a great deal of time and distance for that body of water and the inhabitants and the organisms in that body of water to recover. All right, so continuing with biological indicators of water quality, we're going to talk about macroinvertebrates. So these are organisms that are visible to the unaided eye, so we don't have to use a microscope to see them, and they are organisms that lack a backbone. So they are the most useful organisms for a biological indicator of water quality. They include organisms like crustaceans, like crayfish, mollusks, which include clams and mussels, gastropods, which include snails, oligochaetes, like worms, and then insects. But it's usually the larval forms. So larval forms of insects are the most numerous of the macroinvertebrates, and they are the most useful usually to look at. The larval forms are generally the focus of most stream surveys. So a survey can be done, a survey of the number and type of macroinvertebrates can be done, and that provides a general indication of whether pollutants are present in the water. So here, looking at this chart, when we have good water quality, like 8 to 10 ppm of oxygen, we'll find these organisms in the water. When there's a moderate quality, like 4 to 8 parts per million of oxygen, these are the organisms we will find. And then poor quality, there's 0 to 4 ppm of oxygen. These are the organisms we will find in that body of water. All right, so again, in this side here, we can see visually the macroinvertebrates as bioindicators. All right, so when we have sensitive species, they're found in good water quality. We have tolerant species when the water quality is fair or moderate, and then very tolerant species, that's when the water quality is very poor. Now, keep in mind that organisms that represent poor water quality, they may be found in any type of water. All right, so they might be found in poor quality, moderate quality, and in good quality water. But organisms that represent good water quality are only found in water of good quality. So you would never find like a stonefly nymph. You wouldn't find it here in poor quality water. Okay, so next we're looking at lichen, and lichen is a very unique and important species, and it's also used as a bioindicator. So lichens, these are rootless organisms. They're a combination of fungi and green algae, and sometimes photosynthetic bacteria as well. They're a very hardy organism found on Earth, and they're relatively unaffected by extreme temperatures, or if temperatures are fluctuating. But they cannot tolerate poor air quality. So, so they can tolerate like temperatures, they can survive long periods of drought. They can grow almost anywhere because they're absorbing nutrients directly from the atmosphere. But if that air quality is no good, they cannot survive. So because different varieties of lichen are more sensitive to certain pollutants than others, they are used as an early warning system for air pollution. So the presence or absence of specific lichen varieties, those alert scientists to the presence of pollutants in an area long before other organisms are affected. All right, so lichen, a very important species. So I'll pause here. I have a couple videos on lichen. All right, so lastly, we are just looking at point versus non-point sources. So when we talk about point sources, these are, this is where you can actually find the location where the pollution is originating from. So a specific location where pollution originates, like drain pipes, smokestacks. So therefore, because it's easy to find the location, it's therefore easy to monitor and control. But then there are non-point sources. This is a source of pollution in which pollutants are diffuse and they originate from no specific location. So these pollutants now have had a chance to mix into the environment before they get detected. Examples are like feedlots, golf courses, construction sites, fertilized fields. These are harder to control because the emissions do not occur regularly. Okay, so an example would be like acid rain. This picture is just showing like point sources, so like sewer outfalls, industrial effluent pipes, acid draining out of abandoned mines. Those are easy to find and recognize. And then here, water pollution occurs with bank erosion and bacterial deposition. These ones are the ones like that are difficult to determine since the pollutants are scattered or diffused. All right, last video here, and then that's where we will stop today.